The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, tonight's late debate is a very important matter to many parents in the province of Nova Scotia living with adults with very challenging issues and disability, mental and physical disabilities, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the reason that topic is on the agenda tonight is because most of these organizations in the province of Nova Scotia have had their operating budget funding frozen since 1994. 13 years ago, Mr. Speaker, I'll bring it up clear as mud. 13 years ago, these organizations were told that their services, for their services that they provide to these most vulnerable people in our society, their operating costs are going to be frozen. And let me talk about some of those operating costs like we talked about in today's budget: oil, electricity, building maintenance, and all of those things frozen. And I know now that, you know, there's been a review. There was a need for, I think the government of the day back in 2004 had said the need for a separate vocational review. Mr. Speaker, that review has been ongoing, and I'll go through some of the details in that. In 2005 and 2006, the renewal team established in individual centers reviews would be held. And again, here we are in 2006, you know, the next step, you know, the discussion paper. The discussion paper was put on hold until the department addressed the gaps that were identified in the review. What gaps? Nobody seems to know, or, you know, what gaps? What are the gaps, Mr. Speaker? The identification of what are going to be the next steps in the industry that provide. How many of the executive directors of these organizations and other organizations, they have to do an exorbitant amount of fundraising. And I made this a while back, and I said it at the Standing Committee on Community Services, that how many cinnamon rolls do these organizations have to bake to keep their doors open, to keep our most vulnerable in society with something to do with a day of activity programs, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, operating costs have been frozen since 1994, which is heat, lights, and even insurance. The average percentage of increases in those rates to these facilities is about 64%. You know, it's been, most of this has been borne by these service agencies by increasing the business that they have to do. And again, I make reference to how many cinnamon rolls that they have to bake and sell at fundraisers for activities, you know, so that they can provide the proper staffing. In these facilities, the staffing is a 1-to-8 ratio. Now, Mr. Speaker, in other industries or wherever else, it's a 1-to-1 or 1-to-3 or 1-to-5. But 1-to-8 ratio, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the waiting list. Let's talk about the waiting list. There's an organization in my riding has a waiting list for people with disabilities, adults service centers, from 1 to 5 years to get a person into that facility. Based on the program needs, Mr. Speaker, for individual with higher needs, the waiting time could even be longer. While additional staff may assist some agencies in resolving the issue, facility size can also play an integral role. And again, the freeze for 13 years now of the operating budget of these facilities, our most vulnerable citizens in the province of Nova Scotia. And I'll bring reference today to the budget. On page 23 of that budget, and I will quote on the page of that budget, Mr. Speaker, today, we will not allow anyone to be left behind. Well, Mr. Speaker, we are leaving people behind. We have we've known for years now the rate of autism in this province of Nova Scotia has increased 3 or 4 times full. Mr. Speaker, these parents with children of autism and children with disabilities are keeping their children in school till the age of 21. They should be graduating with their friends at age 18 and 19 and whenever they're leaving school. But the parents have no choice but to keep those children in school in those high schools because of this, because there is no place for these people to go and learn a trade or learn to be employable. You know, and to learn how to be employable. We had a pilot project this year in Port Hawkesbury. I have no idea what the outcome is. I don't know if anybody in the legislature has any idea what that outcome is in Port Hawkesbury. You know, maybe this evening I'll get some light on that fact about this employability program. You know, parents and service providers and clients of these are becoming increasingly frustrated with the service providers' ability to get, give them a clear timeline and a direction for when their children, these are young adults, can actually get into these programs, Mr. Speaker. For us to stand in this legislature or anywhere else in this province of ours and think that we have people like this with disabilities that have nowheres to go in that age group, Mr. Speaker. We have aging facilities with no equipment, and we have no formal method of a process for application for infrastructure or capital projects for these facilities. That's unfair, Mr. Speaker, very unfair, Mr. Speaker. We have not, and clearly defined, like the people that run these organizations and the parents of the children or young adults, they have no definite future plans for their adults. We're all getting older. I'm 52 years of age, Mr. Speaker, and I have a son. That's mentally challenged, Mr. Speaker, that's 32. Now, what is going to be left for him in society? I hear the members over there hooing and hawing about my age. Well, they really should be hooing and hawing about nobody being left behind, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, about nobody being left behind. This is a very serious matter when you have mentally challenged and physically challenged adults that have nowhere to go in this province. And it's been 13 years and this has been frozen. When are we, as members of the Legislative Assembly or anybody else in society in the province of Nova Scotia, going to start dealing with some of these issues? We've heard the stats on the autism. They have to stay in school till they're 21. They have no other choice. They would like to graduate, but they can't. They would love to graduate with their peers. The age requirement, for vocational training centers is 21. If we change the age requirement, will we have spaces? No, we'd have that many more people looking for spaces. No, we wouldn't have any spaces. Mr. Speaker, this is long overdue. I know that, the recommendations in the review, every time I go to ask a question or find out when it's going to become made public, I never get an answer. Nobody gets an answer. There's no clear plan for children and people and families with children with adults, Mr. Speaker, that have learning disabilities. Mr. Speaker, give you an example. Here's an example of a center that applied for a summer student, under the Nova Scotia Economic Development Student Program. They asked for 4 students to help their facility for the summer. They got 1 student for that facility for the summer. Now, I said to them this year, they're going to apply, recently and ask, are they going to apply for students again this year? Well, yes, we're going to ask for 6 students. Are they going to get 1 student again to help alleviate some of the staff vacations or some of the stress there on this? Mr. Speaker, I'd like to also to mention that, requests made by these organizations for additional funding for staff and operational class were again deferred pending the outcome of the review. Deferred pending the outcome of the review. That's all we hear. Parents with people that in this are just frustrated. They have nowhere else to turn, Mr. Speaker. They have nowhere else to do, so they ask, and I'm standing here today, training and employment for adults in our province. Again, and I'll say it was said in the budget today, we will not allow anyone to be left behind. Well, we are leaving these individuals behind. Right on. We are causing great stress within the family. We're causing great stress within the staff that work in these facilities. And how many cinnamon rolls do you have to bake to keep the doors open, to pay the lights, the heat, and the insurance? Could you imagine sitting down every day as an executive director at one of these facilities, trying to keep your doors open? You're sitting down on 80 or 90% of your time writing proposals so we can have our most vulnerable citizens in society to have them in a program. This is unacceptable. Each and every time we ask about, the funding operations in this, it's always been deferred pending the outcome of the review. Well, maybe today, and today is the day, April the 28th, or the day of the budget, maybe they can stand up in this legislature and say, the review is done, some of these buildings and some of these outdated structures will now have the funding that's necessary to provide the funding so that these people can have programs to make their lives better in this province in Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member from Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's indeed a pleasure to join in the debate this evening on the topic. And I want to read the topic, the therefore be it resolved part, because I think it's significant in light of some of the comments that my good friend from Cape Breton Nova has made. Therefore be it resolved, the government recognize the increased costs of fuel, electricity, and other direct expenses incurred by organizations that offer day programs for disabled individuals, and it goes on. But go back to the first line, the increased costs of fuel in Nova Scotia. And it would, Mr. Speaker, be very helpful, if the NDP would support the Liberal position on getting rid of regulation in terms of the gas costs in this province, and go back to a free market system where the gas operators could then compete with one another, and the consumer would be the winner in that by able to go to the cheapest place possible. What's happened under regulation is that the gas prices are going through the roof in this province, and nobody is doing anything to stop it. And our request to reduce the gas tax by 3.8%, the motive tax at the pump, has fell on deaf ears in both the government and the NDP. So I just wonder, while I know that my good friend from Cape Breton Nova is sincere in his remarks, and I listen to him, but it would be helpful if the NDP and the Liberals could perhaps get together and convince the government about the error of their ways in regulating gas in this province, because no one can figure out why it's so high, number one, and no one can figure out why it's higher than New Brunswick, and nobody can figure out why it's higher in Cape Breton than it is in Halifax. But that's the reality of this situation. It is, and it's causing a great deal of concern for those people who have to transport, for example, Meals on Wheels in my riding and in the member from Cape Breton Nova's riding, and I'm sure in ridings all over Nova Scotia, but particularly the ones I'm familiar with in my area. It's getting very expensive for those volunteers to be taking meals to people who live alone and depend on the volunteers to Meals on Wheels to deliver a hot meal every day to somebody who is disabled or a senior citizen. I know one disabled person that I go to see every once in a while waits every day for that Meals on Wheels volunteer to come to his door with a hot meal, because he can't get out. He has very limited resources. He's on Canada Pension Disability, so he doesn't have a lot of money. But it would be, that volunteer is concerned now, because that volunteer, it's costing him a lot more money to put fuel in his car in order to get that hot meal to that person. So let's hope that at some point in time that the three parties in this House can decide that there must be a better way of dealing with the fuel tax situation in this province. I say the same thing about home heating oil in this province. The people on low income in Nova Scotia and the area that I'm most familiar with are hurting out there, and this government has to come up with policies in cooperation with the other two parties here in the House to alleviate some of the problems that these people are having to determine whether or not they're going to heat their homes or eat dinner. And it's that serious in some cases in this province. I don't believe that the programs for the disabled in my area at least, and seniors, are not given the attention they deserve from the government. And the member from Cape Breton Nova is quite correct. There hasn't been an increase in perhaps a dozen years in any meaningful way to support volunteer organizations in the community. And I'm thinking about the Meals on Wheels, of course. I'm thinking about the sheltered workshops that are in both our areas, and I'm thinking about the other organizations that deal directly as volunteers with those people in our community who need assistance and can't get it from government. And and it's often been said, and it's quite true, but government can't be all things to all people. You need a community-based organization. But that community-based organization has to feel that they're not only necessary, but that they're wanted, in the community. And they have to feel that, Mr. Speaker. And if they do, every once in a while receive some assurance from government that it's going to be made easier for them to support the people they serve, then I believe they'll grow in the terms of the ranks of the volunteers. But if they're continually having to reach in their own pockets for things like fuel, additional fuel costs, or transportation issues, or issues with particular halls or issues with the transportation of the disabled in vehicles designed for that purpose, then they're going to be very frustrated. And I think that, for example, people living in apartments, more and more people depend on handy-trans in my area. And handy-trans is a very important tool to get these people to daily doctor's appointments, to get them to get their groceries, and some of these people don't have anybody to do that. I know a number of them that don't. And they depend not only about the gentleman I talked about that depended upon and looked forward to his Meals on Wheel volunteer every day, because it's the same guy, and the person, another female disabled person that I know, looks forward every day to the handy-trans to be able to take her downtown to do her shopping or do her business or pay some bills or go to the hairdresser or whatever. And if those start to disappear, then the burden on government is going to be tenfold or 100-fold what it is now. Because just imagine if all these volunteer organizations in our community decided that they were no longer going to fulfill that role, where would that leave government? You know, what I said earlier, can't be all things to all people, but that would in effect make government all things to all people. And I believe that, so government has to recognize that the volunteers in our communities need help, and they need to be shown that they're wanted, that they're necessary, and that they are providing valuable service to people who are not as fortunate as we are in this place, or fortunate as a lot of our friends are. They have limited income. Sometimes they have limited resources to get things done themselves, and they need help. And I found that over the years that those who do not have an advocate these days to help them get through this maze, for example, of government services that are out there, you know, just to access some of these government services today, these people need help. So, you know, there has to be a system where we make it easier for people to access government services, Mr. Speaker. We make it easier for people to be able to rely on the fact that every day, if they need a meal, it's going to be there. If they need transportation, it's going to be there. And if they need to access a government service, that they can actually talk to a live person. And senior citizens or the disabled are having difficulty, increasing difficulty every day trying to access government programs because of the problems in trying to actually talk to a live person. And if you can actually start dialing a government department someday, and not necessarily this government, but any government department, and try to get somebody to answer your specific questions on the phone about your specific problem, then I'm going to tell you, you're going to be in for an awful shock when you find out when you start finding out that you have to touch this button or touch that button, or you have to go to this person or this line or another line, and you can't really get somebody that genuinely knows about your particular problem and knows how to give you some advice or wants to give you some advice. That doesn't happen. I think what I'm getting at is it's so impersonal today. It's so impersonal that people, unless they have elected advocates or unless they have friends, and what I'm getting at, Mr. Speaker, unless they have volunteers that they can go to in the community to do that work for them, then I believe we all have a responsibility to ensure that continues. And the way that can continue is for government and the department involved, many departments, community services particularly. I see the minister is very interested in what I'm having to say because she's listening very intently, and I appreciate that. We show them that we want them. We show them that we need them, and we show them they have a role to play in the community, because you just can't leave it all up to government, but we have to treat them, I believe, as part of the solution and not part of the problem. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, it's a pleasure for me to rise this evening and speak to this resolution. Mr. Speaker, I have to admit that it never ceases to amaze me, the passion and compassion displayed on the floor of this legislature when we speak of issues that truly touch our hearts. And Mr. Speaker, I have to say again that both my honourable colleagues who've spoken before me here this evening, I know do so from the bottoms of their hearts, some with more personal connection than others, perhaps of those of us in the House, but all of us, nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, with a true desire, Mr. Speaker, with a true desire to make a difference. And so, Mr. Speaker, I rise tonight, and though our numbers are perhaps fewer this evening than they were this afternoon when my honourable colleague delivered the budget speech, I want to say, Mr. Speaker, for those in the House tonight, that I rise, Mr. Speaker, with hope and with vision, especially, Mr. Speaker, for the division within the Department of Community Services known as the Services for Persons with Disabilities. And Mr. Speaker, we all know that the challenges that are before us when it comes to financing, we all wrestle, Mr. Speaker, at the table to get our fair share. And sometimes those with bigger shoulders than I perhaps are more successful with their wrestling competition. But Mr. Speaker, I have to tell you I was extremely pleased today with the commitment that the Minister of Finance and this government made with a vision for the services for persons with disabilities in this province. And though I'm not going to give away all of the details and spoil the fun, Mr. Speaker, of estimates debate, I do want to indicate to both of my colleagues who've spoken so passionately here this evening that there are very, very good things to come, Mr. Speaker. Now, I do want to review this evening a couple of issues that come out of this resolution because Mr. Speaker, I agree. The challenges are great. The challenges that arise every day for organizations, for volunteers, for boards across this province, they're vast, Mr. Speaker, and we all know that the majority of those organizations and those groups, and especially, Mr. Speaker, those groups and organizations who do so on a voluntary basis, who do make the cinnamon rolls and who do go out and fundraise, they're valuable partners, Mr. Speaker, for us. We can't do it alone, and Mr. Speaker, they can't do it alone, and we know that we do it together. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are a couple of specifics that I do want to mention, and I know my honourable colleagues know all the statistics, Mr. Speaker. My honourable colleagues know in excess of 2,000 individuals that we provide over $11 million annually, Mr. Speaker, to those adult service centres across this province, 30 of them indeed, Mr. Speaker. My honourable colleagues know of those operational pressures. They know of those salary increases of late. And Mr. Speaker, they may not know of a couple of projects, Mr. Speaker, that perhaps flew under the radar. And I know that some members in the House this evening would be pleased, for example, to know of the $60,000 on top of the operational funding, Mr. Speaker, that was provided to the Shelburne Association for Community Living, Mr. Speaker, through strategic infrastructure funding, Mr. Speaker, in the 2007 fiscal year. Because, Mr. Speaker, we recognize that those associations, those groups, provide valuable work in our communities. As, Mr. Speaker, does Dask Industries, former brass tacks, Mr. Speaker. I was thrilled to be in Glace Bay and open the new site after that devastating fire. And it was exciting, Mr. Speaker, for all of us in the room. And I gave credit where credit was due. The day of that fire, the honourable member for Glace Bay was on the phone calling, saying, we need dollars. Mr. Speaker, we were there. We were there with the dollars because we knew that the service provided by that association was invaluable, Mr. Speaker, and we would continue to do so. And, Mr. Speaker, I know that the list can go on. One of the ones that was near and dear to my heart, Mr. Speaker, was in Heatherton, the Heatherton Adult Centre, Mr. Speaker, who needed a new kitchen. Mr. Speaker, they needed a new kitchen for more than just than the cinnamon rolls. Mr. Speaker, they have a vibrant business there where they provide a service to the community, and they needed upgrades on their kitchen, Mr. Speaker, and we were able to do that. Again, it was within our means, and Mr. Speaker, it was the right thing to do. I'm not the Minister of Finance, thank heavens, but I am more than happy to wrestle with the Minister of Finance to get as many dollars that we can for those very valuable, vulnerable Nova Scotians and the folks, the staff, the amazing staff who work with these Nova Scotians. Do you know, when I traveled over to Pictou County after the sprinkler evacuation that took place at Riverton, in Riverview. I was blown away by the staff, by the community. They had a successful evacuation. I wasn't overwhelmed by that because I knew that the amazing individuals there would do that. But Mr. Speaker, you should have seen the community support. The community support, that the community that rallied around these individuals, who brought meals, who provided activities for them in the fire departments while they were waiting to get back into their homes, Mr. Speaker. And so again, when you travel around and you meet with some of these individuals, and Mr. Speaker, if you've not had occasion, and I know you have had occasion, for anyone in the House who has not had occasion, I would encourage you to do so. It provides you with a whole new outlook on the quality and the amazing things that are going on in each and every one of our communities. And Mr. Speaker, I was a teacher in this province for 15 years. I saw firsthand the invaluable inclusion that took place in our school system, Mr. Speaker. I see every day when I travel by Bonnie Lee Farms, an amazing spot in my riding, Mr. Speaker, the quality of life that each and every individual Nova Scotian deserves, and Mr. Speaker, that we're able to provide. Mr. Speaker, would I like to be able to do more? Always. Do we do a good job, Mr. Speaker, with the dollars that we have? I believe we do. My honourable colleague mentioned the review process. Mr. Speaker, I know reviews drive all of us a little bit crazy at times, Mr. Speaker, because we could review ourselves right to death. And, Mr. Speaker, I have to admit I agree with my honourable colleague that I've about had it with reviews, and I'm ready to start putting some of the recommendations and some of those decisions into action, Mr. Speaker. And we're going to do that, Mr. Speaker. And again, I will close, Mr. Speaker, with my final again that re-emphasis on the vision and the hope that $6 million that was announced today is just the beginning. We have started the process of putting the dollars on the ground. We've started, Mr. Speaker, the process of not looking at classifying, Mr. Speaker, valuable Nova Scotians by the type of residential or day programming that they require. But, Mr. Speaker, we're looking at these individuals as individuals with challenging needs, Mr. Speaker, that we need to respond to. And, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to working with the service providers, with our partners in the communities, with Directions Nova Scotia Council, with the parents and the adults, Mr. Speaker, in our communities to ensure that the quality of life that they so richly deserve, Mr. Speaker, is provided to them. And so, Mr. Speaker, with those words, I'll take my place, and thank you very much for listening, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the honour members for having taken part in tonight's excellent debate. The motion for adjournment has been made earlier. The House will rise and meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. So the House now stands adjourned.